So today I have the pleasure of interviewing Jason Lee, who's the chair of the State Bar of California Board of Trustees. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you for having me here, Charles.
And Jason is here to mark a very special event, which is a statewide celebration of 100 APA judges. And Jason, I know you've served several roles for the State Bar, including chair of the Judicial Nominations and Evaluations Commission, and you've also served on AABA, Bay Area's Judicial Endorsements Committee. Would you mind sharing what does this milestone mean for you?
It's phenomenal. Really, if I was to think back, which was likely about 15 years ago when I was in San Francisco, involved with AABA and on the board and doing the work on the Judicial Appointments Committee, there was a challenge for us. A challenge for us to put together a pipeline of Asian Americans to be considered for appointment by the governor. And there was not that type of diversity currently on the benches across California. So to be here today and to think that there are 100 APA judges, or at least you've managed to collect 100 APA judges from the Bay Area and likely from across the state, is really a momentous occasion. And having been involved with this type of work for a long time, it's a great moment.
So I believe you served on AABA's board more than a decade ago, and you've certainly were involved in AABA for much longer than that. So around that time period when you began doing judicial pipeline work, can you describe some of the challenges that you faced and that APA bar organizations like AABA faced?
Sure. There were a lot of them, right? And I'm just thinking in my mind how to pace this out so it presents sort of a chronological path, because I think today we're in a much better, though there's still much room for improvement. So thinking back about when we first started doing the work, it was making the case for the importance of diversity on the bench. In my mind, a fundamental value of democracy that ensures fundamental fairness for all of those, not only in our community, but throughout the state. That was a case that needed to be made back then and continues to be made now, though I think we're facing a less of an uphill battle with the different administrations that have been governors in the state. Second was finding people to create the pool so that the governor would have exceptionally qualified individuals to choose from, particularly in the APA community. Third was the black box of how judicial appointments happen. Who is involved? Who were those empowered in, let's say, the Bay Area that could pluck someone from the masses and speed them along their way to appointment? And then understanding the sort of official formal process of getting your application together. You imagine, like, if you're a young lawyer, for me back then I was about 30, early 30s, breaking into what I would think of a code of learning what the application entailed, where the application went, what the formal process was, how to get the governor's office, how to get an interview, and how to get ultimately appointed. I'm much more educated now. But to think that there was a small group of us at the start of our legal careers trying to understand that process, that was a significant challenge. The great thing about AABA, having been involved in this type of work for such a long time, there's a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge now that you no longer need to recreate the wheel when it comes to understanding the judicial appointment process.
And having served as the chair of the Jenny Commission, and you've certainly reviewed a lot of these applications, and the application can be daunting, at least on the state level. I imagine also on the federal level. You have to answer navel-gazing questions like, why do you want to be a judge, and why you, and track your history of important litigations and go back in time quite a bit. So could feel daunting to someone first approaching the process. For an APA attorney, other minority attorney, or really any attorney who is, might feel intimidated by that application process, are there any suggestions that you have that might lessen the fear?
Oh, absolutely. AABA is a great resource, for the reasons I've described. Apparently, there are 100 APA judges that have gone through the process that can be a tremendous resource for you, and potential pool of mentors that can not only shepherd you through the application process, but also introduce you to the people that you'll need to know, so that your name can get known and circulated by the folks who make those appointing decisions.
And you mentioned mentorship. One of the things that I love the most about affinity bar organizations, and particularly AABA, is that we have over 4 decades of leadership and investment by our founders and our longtime members, people who really enjoy and are open to mentoring younger attorneys. I wonder, you've been you've served as a first in several categories, including the first Asian American man to be chair of the California State Bar Board of Trustees. I wonder if mentors have played an important role in your career path, and if there's anything that you'd be willing to share with younger attorneys about finding mentorship.
Absolutely. I think the stories of how mentors played a role in my life and my career, and my ultimate position as the first Chinese American and the youngest chair ever to take the helm at the State Bar. I can't credit enough the people who not only offer their hand in friendship, but also open doors for me. So a couple stories. When I was served as chair of the Judicial Appointments Committee for AABA, we had a meeting at a local bar, as we were prone to do, and we were discussing how to break the code, as I described, how to understand the judicial application process, the appointment process. How does Jenny work, the Judicial Nominees Evaluation Commission, and we had recruited Dale Minami as sort of our elder advisor to assist us in getting through this really labyrinth-like path to getting this information. So he had served on Jenny before, and he probably was one of the first to serve as an APA on that commission, and he had always advocated for one of us to do it, and this was sort of his plea at the end, which was, in order to understand the process, you got to serve and you got to do it. But then footnote, it takes a ton of time. You got to travel a lot, and all these other sort of time-sucking commitments that would take you away from, what was for a lot of us the start of our career. And he was met with sort of, 10 seconds of silence. And I think he had made it sort of an impassioned plea. And then I sort of, I raised my hand to take that role, and he facilitated my application to the Jenny Commission, and I was ultimately appointed. And he has helped me along the way since then. I mean, it's been a decade. So I'm not sure whether Dale would say, yeah, Jason, he's one of my mentees, but I certainly credit him with some very important decisions that I've made with his advice throughout my career.
One of the things that I hear from young attorneys quite a bit is that they're reluctant to or embarrassed to ask an older attorney for mentorship or guidance. Are there any suggestions that you would have for a younger attorney? I'll
repeat what another mentor told me, which is you just got to show up. Finding, meeting, and convincing someone to be a mentor is not something where you just present yourself and hand in an application. I'm a mentee, I'm looking for a mentor. You have to show up to events, you have to be prepared to meet a lot of people, and you have to be prepared to make your case. Who you are, what your commitments to, in AABA's instance, I think powerful, convincing evidence of your commitment to the APA community will open a lot of doors and introductions to folks who are prepared to be mentors to young lawyers. And AABA has done a terrific job in fostering that type of environment, to sort of the generational transfer of empowerment, really, to young lawyers, so that they can move forward and move the community forward.
In your career, you've worked with affinity organizations and also in broader state bar service, and you brought up the example of Dale. Now Dale and Judge Fougier, kind of went to Berkeley in the wake of the Civil Rights era, and so as Dale was one of the founders of AABA Bay Area. And experienced being an APA really at the inception of the APA movement. Attorneys nowadays, 43 years later, have quite a different experience. But for diverse attorneys, what would you say to encourage them to also seek leadership roles in organizations like the State Bar Foundation or the Judicial Council, Jenny, things like that?
One of the challenges of being a minority, underrepresented lawyer in the legal profession is that opportunities don't present themselves as they would for others. Being involved in AABA and other affinity bar organizations allows a young lawyer to develop leadership skills from the sort of the basic building blocks, leadership opportunities that may not present themselves in other environments. It certainly was my experience that those opportunities did not present themselves. And in order to, and this is where I feel like you make the connection between your success as a lawyer, as a advocate, as a leader in the community. Leadership is not developed, is not an innate trait, from my view. Certainly there may be those with that talent to be a natural leader. I don't know if that exists. It takes years of cultivating a combination of savviness, of knowledge, of an ability to connect with people, and my failure to articulate the reasons why taking on leadership positions in affinity bars is such an important thing. But it is ultimately a way to train yourself for broader roles across the state. And those opportunities exist in AABA and other affinity bar organizations.
Having served in leadership roles at really the highest levels of very important institutions in our bar, in our judicial system, how would you describe leadership, and what are the best ways to acquire those skills or traits? And understanding that leadership is described differently by different people. Some people think of it as traits and personality characteristics. Others think of it in terms of values. But how would you describe it, and how might a young attorney gain those traits or skills?
Right. Leadership is an amorphous concept if you were to sort of reach out and think of what leadership is, I feel like when you see it. And what I mean by that is, in my view, it's a results-oriented package of skills and ability. I think we, as a community, as an APA community, have been challenged by these preconceived notions of what leadership should look like. And those are things that we face, young attorneys face, I face today. So when I think of what is a leader, I think it's a leader that produces results in whatever fashion that person does it. Really, to me, is irrelevant. But you tie that in with, some end goal. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're a leader. I think you weave in the ideas of important values that you share with those in your community, those within the state, and your ability to move many people towards that shared goal is a real critical aspect of effective leadership.
Jason, if you don't mind sharing, serving in the important positions that you have isn't an accident, right? So it's not an accident to serve as chair of the Jenny Commission or become the chair or president of the state bar. Would you mind sharing with the audience, maybe a moment of decision that you may have had that will be useful, perhaps, to someone who might be in a similar position?
Sure. So I guess I'll say one important thing, at least with my path, is that there really was no master plan. Like, I did not set out 20 years ago to take on this ultimate role now as being chair of the state bar. But I now have the benefit of hindsight a little bit of seeing how this all sort of came together. And with the benefit of that hindsight, I'll say that there was a moment in my career, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when I decided that certain things were very important to me. Among them, judicial diversity, of achieving a bench both on the federal and state level in California that was truly representative of the population. And then to facilitate and advocate for Asian Americans to be a part of that formula. I carried that principle all the way through to this current role. So if I was to think serving on, I'll even back up, meeting David Chu when he was the president of AABA, recruiting the group of us to serve on various committees, ingratiating myself with the Judicial Appointments Committee, convincing them that I was someone who could do something and contribute, to getting on the AABA board. All those, the common theme there was judicial diversity, as I described. Applying to Jenny, serving as the chair, instituting training at the Jenny level, addressing implicit bias, about talking about how a judge, how preconceived notions of what a judge looks like and sounds like is not what is only one of many people, candidates that could serve as a great bench officer. Taking that experience and being asked to apply for the Board of Trustees based on the breadth of my work in judicial diversity, and then ultimately being exposed to much larger issues in the legal community at the Board of Trustees level, and getting the confidence of the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court for this ultimate appointment. I would say that is one theme that has been consistent throughout my public service.
You mentioned the theme of judicial diversity, and we live in an era where at least some people vocalize their question about the value of diversity and inclusion, and that's probably more vocal than than that conversation has been in decades. Would you feel comfortable sharing why you think diversity on the bench is still important?
It always has been important and remains critically important today. So I'll take a couple steps back and do my best to describe my view of this, which is, the courts, judges, and the judicial system is the mechanism in which fundamental fairness can be achieved. It is an important third branch of our government and impacts people individually and collectively on a daily basis. So you start with that concept. And then you take the next step and you think about how can effective justice be decided. The only way that can happen is if you have the people who are making those decisions reflect the perspectives of the population of our great state. And that population is a rich mix of cultures from around the world that reach generations that have lived and labored in our state. So if you lack those perspectives on the bench, then you are robbed of an opportunity to effectuate justice and fairness. So that's my, I think, best description of why I believe judicial diversity is important. And I would say the case for that is made when you see a system that is not diverse and how that impacts the minority community. And that has happened in most recent history, and particularly in my area of the world. You had the entire city of Bell, and the judicial system there that was not diverse, that was essentially using its power to suppress an African American community. You have, so I would say that that's one example. There are many different examples of how the lack of judicial diversity can negatively impact minority communities in the state.
It strikes me living here in San Francisco that my friend Don Tamaki describes it as integration, that the degree of integration lies at different points for different cities. And I think to Honolulu. Honolulu is quite different from San Francisco, and San Francisco is quite different from Los Angeles, and Los Angeles from New York and DC and Atlanta and so on. And one might place those cities on a continuum. As a bar organization that exists in a city primarily that is 1/3 Asian and has had the historic benefit of a sitting APA mayor, president of the Board of Supervisors, current and former Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court. Why is it still relevant? In other words, why are affinity bar organizations like AABA still relevant?
So it is absolutely true that the Bay Area, and San Francisco in particular, has the fortune of tremendously talented APA leaders at every level in every branch of government. And I sometimes joke that San Francisco is a bubble in the greater scheme of the state and of this nation. I can't think of another place, particularly for the Asian American community, that has homegrown talent that has not only dominated the political scene in San Francisco, but also spread through to the entire state. I mean, you've pointed to the Chief Justice. There are AABA alum who serve now in the Senate and the Assembly of California. There is Asian Americans who serve in leadership roles in the executive branch. So why is AABA relevant? Because the success of our talented leaders does not mean that the problems and the obstacles have disappeared for Asian Americans in particular, or any minority lawyer, since we're talking about an attorney organization. Not only do they persist, they're everywhere, and there are obstacles that I've faced throughout my career. But AABA is an incredibly strong organization that reinforces the progress and advances that progress in increments. In the how many years has it been around? 40, 50?
43.
Yeah, 40. The oldest Asian American legal organization in this country.
I think Scala might have something to say about that, but close.
Oh, is there? Okay. I always thought AABA was the oldest, but I guess that's not a too difficult of a contest. The fact that there are two organizations that can count decades in existence for the APA community is fantastic. So that is why AABA is important. It's to continue the advocacy, to continue the progress, and to prevent, as we've seen now in this country, the receding belief of some of the core fundamentals of our country, the values that I share, that have eroded. And AABA is a part of that solution.
Since you mentioned that topic, I wonder if you have any thoughts you'd be willing to share on what some call the erosion of the rule of law. Some people speak in more dire terms, but the role of attorneys and the bar in protecting the rule of law.
We play a critical role in the shoring up of the rule of law. I mean, I talked about fundamental fairness and about the importance of a strong judicial system, of a diverse judicial system. Attorneys as officers of the court is a part of that system. And attorneys have, from the very beginning, been a part of advancing the rights of those who have been oppressed. And there is no other time than in modern history, as far as I'm concerned, where the role of lawyers and the courts are critically important in protecting individual rights and in protecting the rights of communities. And we see that particularly in the Ninth Circuit, particularly in San Francisco, particularly in California. Attorneys and the courts have really staked their position in real fierce opposition of the policies that are emanating from Washington, D.C.
And in the Bay Area, even though to tie those two threads together, even though we might right now be at near a peak, at least historic peak in terms of representation in public life, oftentimes minority attorneys, APA attorneys, and members of the APA community are reluctant to commit to public service. And as someone who has made public service an important part of your life, what would you say to those people considering not just leadership, but specifically public service, to encourage them to do so?
There is no better thing that you can do for yourself and your community than to dip your toe in public service. If you were to think what can one person do to help others? One person do to serve a profession? What can one person do to serve a judicial system? It's that bigger picture that you're introducing yourself into when you take the first step into public service. So those are the benefits I think you accrue as a young lawyer, the people you'll meet, the skills you'll obtain, the leadership that you'll hone over the course of hopefully decades. That I think is a powerful argument of why an individual would want to serve the public. Those are benefits that accrue directly to you. The other important value I'll say is that you, as a Asian American lawyer, as a lawyer, owe it to the community, to the public, to serve. That is a fundamental tenet of being a lawyer, that you continue to improve society, to perpetuate democracy. It's a job that, it's not just a job. When you enter the profession, it's an obligation that you agree to take up, and you must never lose sight of that obligation. So in closing, I'll say the combination of the individual benefits you'll accrue from doing public service and the fulfillment of an obligation you take on for being a lawyer, for joining a profession, I think are powerful, two powerful reasons why you'd want to consider public service.
And just one last question. AABA this year is 43 years old. NAPABA reached its 30-year milestone in Chicago last November. And so we have the benefit of decades of people who've been a part of these affinity bar organizations. But for the younger attorneys who are trying to decide whether to commit their time, their scarce time, to affinity bar organizations like AABA, like NAPABA, is there anything that you would like to say to them?
So I remember when I was a young lawyer who just graduated law school, came from a family of farmers, generations of farmers, first generation American, and I had no idea what it was like to be a lawyer, to practice law. I didn't know the lawyers growing up. And AABA was that, and continues to be that sanctuary for me, to find a path where there may not have been a history of practicing law, or even knowing other people who have chosen this profession. So that's the individual pitch. AABA is almost singular in its dedication to service to the Asian American community at every level, from top to bottom. And there isn't another finer organization in which you can spend your time advancing those interests. And as you pointed out, it is 43 years of a rich history that started with a handful of Asian Americans in a very small population of Asian American lawyers throughout the state, where we have grown to take on, as you mentioned, incredibly powerful and important positions, not only in the Bay Area, but across the state. You join those ranks when you decide to devote some time to AABA, and those returns to you individually accrue immediately, and the benefits that the organization with your contributions make to the community at large, tremendously satisfying.
All right. Thank you for your time, Jason.
Thank you.